What would your business look like if you had more than 400 of the world's top entrepreneurs helping you? That's what this podcast will do for you. Douglas Vermeeren is known on Fox, CNN, NBC, ABC, and others as the modern-day Napoleon Hill for his interviews with more than 400 of the world's top business leaders and successful entrepreneurs. In this podcast, he will unfold their strategies, systems, and rituals in an easy-to-implement way that will help you get to business success faster than you ever imagined. Welcome to Entrepreneur of Influence.
We have a very special guest today, my friend Anthony Daniels. From his earliest memory, Anthony wanted to be a professional actor. He experienced moderate successes in the theater, and then an opportunity appeared that changed his future forever. He met George Lucas. After this meeting, Anthony was invited to participate in a little movie that few people believed in, and it was called Star Wars. It was revolutionary, and this film tried to break every rule imaginable. Very few people believed it would even succeed, but because of George Lucas's belief in the project and perseverance, it turned out to be the greatest science fiction film ever made. Anthony is the only actor to ever appear in all of the Star Wars films as the Golden Protocol droid C3PO. He appeared in Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, The Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and the latest installment, The Clone Wars. Anthony has been involved in many of the Star Wars spin-offs. Some of the more memorable include performing in 3 radio dramatizations, tap dancing on The Muppet Show, dancing with Donnie and Marie Osmond, taking part in the Oscar ceremonies, befriending Big Bird on Sesame Street, voicing the animated figure in Disney's Star Tours ride, becoming a breakfast cereal with Kellogg's C3POs, and conducting the London Symphony and the Boston Pops Orchestra, and also starring in the cartoon series Droids. Currently, he is working on a regular animated TV series, The Clone Wars. If you can think of anything Star Wars related, pretty much Anthony's attached. Let's go to the interview, and Anthony can tell you a little bit about how he got to his success.
When did you first realize that you wanted to be an actor?
Well, I don't remember a time when I didn't want to be an actor, which I suppose if I thought back, there was this, I think I wanted to be a milk delivery person at one point, but I was probably about 5. And I think after that, there was something about the magic of theatre, as I saw it, that made me want to be an actor, and I don't ever remember having a serious thought otherwise.
Now, your parents, of course, had other plans for you. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, back in the, when I was 18, which would be around 1964 or 3, something like that. So if you think back to the 60s, when, a lot of your listeners may not even been born, it was a very different world then. It was kind of beginning to be topsy-turvy, of course. But back then, a real career was the thing you went for. So a real career at that point was being a teacher or a doctor or a lawyer, an engineer probably, a scientist, a banker would be good. Makes you laugh now, doesn't it, when you look at the trouble that the banks are in. And this was what you called a profession. Acting was also called a profession, but with a slightly wry smile, I think. So my parents really wanted me to have a safe, secure profession.
And did they not encourage you to go to law school, or where did you wind up?
Well, when I said I wanted to be an actor, they sort of demurred, and after some toings and froings, well, why don't you be a lawyer? And I had lost all enthusiasm and just sort of said, okay. And I tried it, and I was intensely unhappy. And I always say the one thing that kept me going was to be in amateur plays and productions, evenings and weekends. And that was what I lived for. Because that's, many people have jobs where their real pleasure time is their leisure time at the weekends and so on, and sports. But, when you're heavily at odds with the job you want to do, life is pretty miserable.
Mm-hmm. So it'd be fair to say that the key is to find your passion first and a job second.
Well, I was lucky. I had a passion. Some people don't have it. You can call it a vocation, a calling, whatever you like. Some people just are happy with any old job. Somebody with a calling really needs to do the job. It's nothing silly about it. It's a real thing. You can have a calling to do the weirdest stuff. I mean, acting's pretty weird, but some people have a calling to be a chiropodist, a foot doctor. Well, of course, I would run a mile from that. But thank goodness there are people who are foot doctors in this world. I think you'd have to have a calling to be able to put up with being a foot doctor. I don't know about you. So I guess I had a calling, however ridiculous, a need. And eventually I was incredibly lucky that I think my grandmother died and left me a very small amount of money, which in those days was somewhat bigger than it would be now. But that enabled me to have a slightly freer attitude. But the real reason that I felt able to be an actor was that during one of these amateur evenings or weekends, a man who was a member of the same society heard me say, I said to him, I wish I was an actor. And he looked at me, he was a teacher, and he said, if you want to be an actor, be an actor. And he was the first person to give me, as it were, unlock the ability that I was a free agent. I could do something I wanted to do. And some months later, I got myself into drama school.
That's fantastic. Now, of course, you've got one person there that believed in you, but surely there were many, many, many that told you that it wasn't possible to fulfill your dreams. What was it that kept you going once you decided that's what you wanted to do? What was it that kept you, able to proceed?
Well, I suppose it was the belief. It was the only thing. There was nothing else that I kind of wanted to live for, which sounds maybe exaggerated. But, I could do all sorts of other jobs. I could stack shelves in a supermarket. But it wouldn't have given me any quality of life that would have made life worth living. And, again, I think if somebody has a calling, that is what they must do. And I had to do it. And, of course, they were absolutely right. There are things in the way that make given professions difficult. Acting is very, very hard to choose as a profession. And I say that as somebody who's been very lucky. But my belief that it was the only thing that gave me any kind of satisfaction, any kind of sense of fulfillment. You can get this from, people get fulfilled in all sorts of different ways. Mine was the need to talk to an audience or be with an audience of any size. It didn't have to be huge, just to be able to perform. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's very hard to explain because a lot of it was inside. And when you try and explain, it can sound silly or ridiculously artistic and so on. But that was my artistic outlet.
So when did you first realize that maybe, acting now wasn't just a passion, but it is now a career? When did you first start seeing the success of this develop?
Well, I was very, very lucky. It was a 3-year course at a college, and I was very lucky that I had a teacher, another inspirational teacher, and this time he was in the sound department, so we would make recordings and readings and so on. And then every year the BBC in London have a competition for all the schools across the country, and they choose one student out of, maybe 100 and something, to be the prize winner, and I was the prize winner, with the title of BBC Award winner, and also, more important than it doesn't happen now, it gave me a union ticket, which meant I could become a member of Equity, British Equity, at the Actors Union. It's all changed now, but back then you couldn't get a job unless you had an Equity membership, and you couldn't have an Equity membership without having a job. What a ridiculous catch-22 situation. That's all changed, but that was the first real... I remember being stunned and overwhelmed by it, and then I just got on with it, and for 6 months did two big plays a week for the radio, because we have still in Britain a very large radio drama. And I learned, obviously a lot about voice production. I continue to think about that as I have done at college. From the radio, I was really bad, because during the last few weeks of my contract, I actually went and auditioned for a theatre just outside London and got the part and had to go to the bookers at the BBC and say, can you not book me for this time, rehearsal times. So I cheated a bit on the BBC, and eventually my time was up there and I could go to the theatre without pretending. I was in a production, then I was in the second production, and on the last night of that, a man came up to me and said, thought I was pretty good, and, people say things in theatre and, don't always believe them. And I found out that I knew who he was. He ran a very successful part of the National Theatre. And I went on Monday and I signed on at what we call the labour exchange, where when you have no work, you go and sign your name and they give you a small amount of money each week, the dole. And I signed on there. And then Tuesday my phone rang and it was my agent saying, they want you to go and join the company. So I think the next day, the Wednesday, I went and joined the National Theatre at the Young Vic and was there for 2 years, touring around Europe and also in their London home. And it was during that time that my agent came up with the name of George Lucas.
Oh, who's he?
Who's he? Back in 1975, he wanted to make apparently a low-budget sci-fi movie, and I wasn't very interested in sci-fi. And
is it true that you actually asked for a refund on the ticket that you purchased for 2001?
It's 100% true. I kind of smile at myself now for having the courage to do that. And it was about a third of the way through the movie, and I did go to the manager, who was wearing a tux and a dicky bow tie and all that kind of thing. He was quite tall, and he looked down at me and said, why do you want your money back? I said, because it's a really boring film. He said, get lost. Actually, he didn't get lost. He was so much ruder things than that. Nowadays, nobody would ever speak to you in such a rude way, but he did. And of course, years later, I was to eat my words, because when I did eventually meet George Lucas, we talked about 2001, and I ended up watching it again by myself in the Fox screening room, looking at the whole film by myself. And indeed, flying to America the other day, I watched it on the airplane. I was amazed. There it was again. And now I'm very fond of it, actually.
How exciting. So how did you get involved with Star Wars?
Well, my agent explained that this unknown American, wanted somebody to play the part of a robot, and she could sense my negativity instantly, because she said, no, I do think you should go and see him. I just said, no. What do you mean? She said, just go meet it. I said, I don't want to play a robot, because back then, well, it was nothing. A robot was a Dalek. I don't know. You've probably seen the new Doctor Who series. Mm-hmm. Daleks look a bit like R2-D2 now.
Yes.
But back then, and now, Daleks can go upstairs, fly, everything, just like R2-D2 can. In the old days, Daleks were men huddled over a bicycle kind of arrangement, I think. They were sort of wobbling about on wheels in a box.
I think it's also safe to say that prior to R2 and C3PO, very few robots even had a character or personality as well.
They were dead lumps of metal.
You got it.
So why would I do this? And she actually said, don't be so... And she used a really, really vulgar expression, because she was an agent and they're tough people. But her gist was, don't be so stupid. And she said, go meet him. You never know what it could lead to. And so I went. And, famously, I walked into his office, and there was a perfectly ordinary, downbeat, sort of quiet, shy man. He did speak with an American accent. He wore jeans and the same plaid shirt he's wearing to this day. And we had a very... sort of feeble conversation, because neither of us was terribly enthusiastic. He, I have to say, was seeing an actor every 5 minutes of the day, and I think I was probably 321 of that particular session, and he just had actors, up to his ears. So, and the thing that really sold it to me, the movie, was an artist's impression on the wall, what you call a concept painting, where somebody drafts out some visual ideas for the movie. See, I didn't know any words like Death Star or Darth Vader or anything like that. But there amongst these pictures was this strange metal character staring out of the frame towards me, and somehow we connected. There was a complete, I don't know, communion, the spirit. I cannot explain it to this day. It's never happened before or since. I connected with the picture. The face in the picture was saying, "Come and join me," or he was, I don't know, it wanted to connect, because it was neither male nor female. It was obviously made of metal. And so I kind of went away a bit stunned, after an hour. I'd been there, I think. So there was a whole line of people outside by now. And then they sent a script to me, and the next day, and, it's tough enough understanding what Star Wars is about when you see the movie. When you read it page by page, scene to scene, by POV to POV, it's point of view to point of view, it's very tough reading. The one thing I got, the one thing I understood was every time this metal man came in, he had a weird take on everything. He was different, wasn't a hero, wasn't a villain, he was just himself. So the next day, literally, I went back to meet George, and after an hour of kind of talking about sci-fi and stuff, there was a pause, and I said, "Well, may I play the part?" And he just said, "Sure." This is the way he kind of said, "Yes, it's sure." And there we are. That was the beginning of it all.
How exciting. So let me ask you, what was your most challenging part of working on these movies, the most challenging thing that you faced?
Well, the first challenge was to make the suit around my body. So the first hurdle was to get a mold of my body, and creating that was really quite a bizarre experience and not entirely comfortable. The second one was to be there while the art crew made the suit, which I would go and test out pretty much every alternate day of the week whilst I was still on stage in the evening. So that was a challenge. But then being out in the desert and putting on that suit for the first time when it wasn't in fact finished, so it didn't work. It was, hugely, hugely uncomfortable because it didn't fit together comfortably, and it pinched me and scraped and everything. Then the challenge comes to, how do I really get a personality through this metal and fiberglass and plastic? And somehow my training, did it. We'll come on to the voice maybe later, but so I had individual challenge, which was to be the person in the script, or the creature in the script that I read and learned. And I learned the words the way I interpreted the words the way I saw them. They weren't my words. I was given the lines to speak, and I said them my way. And I tried to make the best of it. This was a new departure for me. I mean, it's really a challenge I'd never had before. Mm-hmm. I played a parrot on the radio, but hey, that's not difficult.
Well, like we said, there was no one that's ever done what you've done before, so even to look for examples out there, I mean, you were inventing something brand new.
Yes, and, that was the way George was approaching the movie, to make something brand new, kind of old-fashioned but brand new. One of the really huge challenges was, in the script, I had read all the time R2-D2 would burble a response or bleep a reply, or it had words like that to describe his dialogue. The real shock came to me was that R2-D2 was totally silent throughout. So that in some of the longer scenes I was carrying what should have been pages of dialogue as pages of monologue, and sometimes in desperation I would write out my interpretation of his lines, R2's lines, so that I would learn the whole page. It would make it easier for me to know that he was sort of saying, "I'm going over there." "What do you mean? Where are you going?" Because I had to make it real for myself. So I'm wearing this ghastly suit. I am now best friends with a box that stands there or runs over my feet or tries to push me over, because sometimes there was an actor called Kenny Baker inside to make it wobble, but other times it's pretty much every time it moves, it's either pulled on a string or it's on a remote control gizmo operated by the camera, and really quite uncontrollable. And the object itself is very heavy. It's got lots of batteries in and the radio receivers and all that kind of thing. And it used to crash into me. And, once I really had to stop it falling down into Luke Skywalker's home because of the steps there, and it was going to crash and burn, And it nearly knocked me over, all that kind of thing. But the big thing was trying to create a relationship with a garbage bin. And at one point I did ask George if he could do a voice, do a beep or something when I had finished my line, so it would make it a dialogue rather than a monologue. And he tried, and he was terrible. So I just improvised the scene, all the scenes with R2, and made it look as though I believed in him or it, and therefore the audience believes.
Sure, and you did a fantastic job. I mean, you're right, R2 really didn't give you much to work with there, no face expressions or anything to sort of play off of, so, it must have been a real challenge. So let me ask you, how did you come up with the voice? And I also understand that at one point they were looking at casting you in the suit, but not necessarily using the voice.
That's right. I had tried over 6 months so many different voices, I can't tell you. And I didn't like any of them. I didn't tell anyone else, I think. It's embarrassing sometimes. That's one thing you have to get over as an actor, forget being embarrassed. I don't know. I worked and worked and worked, and I bored myself senseless. And as the day approached, I still hadn't made a decision. And then out there in the desert, and dressed up, being 3PO, a number of voices came together. A number of ideas from the script came together. A number of ideas about the situation came together. And 3PO arrived. George Lucas had written a very clever thing into the script and the personality. He had made a android for protocol and etiquette. Etiquette being sort of the ultimate way of being polite. Protocol about who should go through a door first, who's order of magnificence, if you like. This politeness thing was so totally out of place with the whole world that Star Wars was, all these explosions and things. And so he very cleverly made this dramatic dissonance. 3PO was not happy. He wanted to be somewhere serving cocktails and canapes and all that kind of thing. And I had a little microphone up by my eyebrow, and then a cable ran down my back into a little radio transmitter shoved in a very tight area. And so they would get a very, very bad guide track of lots of... I sounded more like Darth Vader, really. And they would use that. Well, actually, often after that, I would re-record it immediately on set to give them a clear take, because it was driving the editors crazy editing with it. And I could remember my timing and so on. And then, yes, some 6 months later, I went over to Hollywood to put my voice on it. It was there that I found that George had tried people like Richard Dreyfuss to put his voice, his character, on the film. Because, as George explained, I was a little surprised, but as George explained, he'd never thought of 3PO as being this kind of uptight British butler. And, with actors, unless you direct them a certain way, they will do their own thing. And George was directing the whole movie, so he didn't have time to tell me how to play my part or whatever. He was busy, making sure that something got on film before the whole budget crashed and, destroyed his project, for sure. He was dealing with storms that were wrecking the sets, dealing with lots of effects that just did not work, dealing with money problems in Fox. He thought, he actually said the words, "We can fix the voice later." What I didn't realize was we could put another one on. But he was great. Now here's the thing. Talk about challenges. George had taken his script round for many, many months, I think several years, to studios to say, "I got this kind of idea for a kind of space thing," and they were saying, "Yeah, get lost. It's rubbish. We'll hate it. Everybody will hate it. We'll never make money." But he toughed it out. He just believed in it so much that in the end somebody gave him a tiny budget. It was 20th Century Fox, Merlin Mann Jr. And he gave George, just like my grandmother gave me the seed money to go to drama school, so George got a tiny budget from Fox. And made all sorts of compromises, I think, in the deal just to get it done, just to get the thing he believed in done. And on the set, he was the only person who truly believed this film would work. You know, George is a fine example of sticking to your aim, your goal, whatever other people say.
I think so, and I think that's really important for our listeners to hear, is that, you know, sometimes all it takes is just a little window to open and a little bit of belief in what you can do, and you can do anything if you put your mind to it, and if you stick to the focus of where you're looking to go and what you're looking to do. I think you're a great example of that, and so is George Lucas. You know, again, brilliant examples of what the power of intention can really create.
There's plenty of people around who, for whatever reason, can be fairly negative. No, don't do that, you'll fail. Don't do that, you'll be poor. Don't do that, you'll be hungry, you'll be unhappy, whatever. Don't do that because I tried it and I failed. You know, the human spirit is huge and wonderful, and, you know, often keeps us alive in times when it doesn't seem much point. Now, anything that can, you know, the need to be alive is very, very strong. The need to succeed at something, to move forward, to be adventurous is very strong in people. It tends to get crushed. Be careful. Don't do that. It's dangerous, you know. It's very difficult, you know, as an older person or a teacher, you might want to stop people doing something that's potentially going to harm them. And, you know, you should say to somebody standing on the edge of a cliff, you know, I wouldn't go any further because it might crumble and you might fall in. Now, you might sound like an old maid saying that, but, you know, if it crumbles and the guy falls in, wouldn't you wish you'd said it? Mm-hmm. But then if you say it might stop somebody falling off a cliff and learning to fly.
Absolutely.
So it's a hard point. But both, you know, I wouldn't put George and myself in the same boat, because he's, you know, I did what I did, but George is utterly inspirational. But nevertheless, we shared that. We went on in spite of people saying nay.
You know, it's interesting, too, because, and you can maybe tell me if this is true, I heard that right after, of course, when Star Wars came out, we know that they tried to promote R2 and C3PO as actual robots, and, you know, I heard that you maybe were having second thoughts about coming back for Empire because of that. Was that true?
It was a very difficult time, to be honest. You know, I'd had a very, very tough time filming, but that's what filming and road building is about. You have a tough time. Then when you've done it, not that road builders put their name on roads generally, I think, but actors, part of the deal is you kind of get acknowledged for what you did, like an artist signing his name, you know, Rembrandt at the bottom of the picture. And I fairly quickly realized that nobody was allowed to interview me, or my name never appeared on, you know, publicity stills. It would say, you know, Luke Skywalker, brackets Mark Hamill, with C3PO in a scene from Star Wars. And, you know, it was a while before I challenged them, and they said, yeah, we need people to think you're a real robot. Well, that was quite difficult. There was no way that I was going to spoil people's feelings, like telling them Santa Claus is, you know, maybe a myth. I'm still not sure about that. But that was a post-filming challenge. And certainly it took some thought before I agreed to do the second film.
Well, of course, we're all glad that you did, and as a child, I remember believing that you were a real robot, and that's also a testament to the skill that you had in portraying that character. I mean, you know, we really forgot that we were watching an actor, and so that's really important.
You know, it's a very nice testament, and thank you, but if you hadn't, then I would have been failing at my job, and my job was to be a robot. Nowadays, you will notice that people are much better at giving credit to, because many more films are made with special effects, created by actors and then remodeled in some way, whether it's motion capture or whatever. But now there is an acknowledgement, yes, an actor played this, and, you know, for heaven's sake, then the added video extras on your DVD will show you the whole process, you know. I think it's fairly simplistic to think that the audience are too dim to not accept a film just because they know how it's done. You know, there's two sides to a film. You can enjoy the whole magic of seeing it from beginning to end and believe all the characters. Then you can enjoy it again by finding out how it was done. And you can still go back and enjoy the first one. So I think times have changed in these 30-something years. I'm now the only person to be in all 6 Star Wars films.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'd like to go next. I mean, you're talking about, back when we first saw the C3PO for the first time, there was no such thing as the CG animation that we have today. I mean, Lucas pioneered so much of this stuff. What are the significant changes on playing C3PO today?
Playing him is absolutely no different. He is what he is. He's always been this machine, this domestic appliance, if you like. He very much depends on the circumstances in which he's put, because his personality is set. Your washing machine isn't suddenly going to turn into a refrigerator. So you see C3PO. As far as filming goes, it's almost an extension now of R2 not making any sound. Because in the old films, you had wonderful, wonderful set pieces, scenery that was just magical to look at and touch and play with, because it was so beautifully made by the scenic department, the art department. Nowadays, as many people know, often the only thing in a scene that is real is the floor, whatever the floor is, whether it's tiles or a slight rocky surface or whatever. They'll often make that real, just paint the floor a different shape and so on, because the floor is the most difficult thing to do in animation, because you need the weight of the character on the actual floor. So it's easier to make the floor real. But apart from that, there about 100 yards away is a green wall, or a blue wall, depending on what the scene is going to be about. And you have to imagine. Mm-hmm. And if there's monsters, George says, in the script it says the door opens, these whatever creatures fly out or do something. And I said to George, well, what are the creatures like? Well, are they big? Are they little? Or do they fly? What are they? He said, kind of this big. And that helps, you see, because later the animators, I'm looking at the place where they are going to animate. So you do have to use your imagination. But, going back to the days when I was on radio, you only have a microphone. You don't have scenery on radio. So in a way, the new films don't bother me. The thing is, it's not so much fun. You can't walk into a studio and say, gosh, look at that. Isn't that incredible? You can say that when you see the movie, because there the art department would have put them in CG and post-production. But now, not only does R2-D2 still not talk to me, but often in the scenes, it wasn't there at all, because George would actually put him in digitally later on. Because again, even though Don Bees, who operates R2-D2, is absolutely ace with this remote control, sometimes George felt, no, it's easier just to put him in digitally afterwards. So my last shot was the very last shot I did in the Star Wars movie was by myself on a blue carpet with a blue background, talking to R2-D2, who would be put in later, and so I hauled along the vacuum cleaner as a chum during the rehearsal. Crew liked it.
How funny.
George didn't leave it in the movie, which is sad.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is in my head. So when I go and see the films, it's kind of interesting to see, okay. And what is glorious is, for the most part, it is seamless. And one of the things I like about the other film I'm in, so I'm the only actor to be in all 7 Star Wars movies now, is Clone Wars, because that is all digital, beautifully painted, beautifully rendered. The lighting is superb. It's filmed like a movie would be. And because everything is CG, there is a completeness about it. Nothing jars.
Well, it was definitely well done. I enjoyed it myself. Let me ask you, what are you up to next? What's on the horizon for Anthony?
More Clone Wars. Next week I'll be back in England. Right now I am being a visiting professor, as they call me, at Carnegie Mellon University Entertainment Technology Center, where I come several times a year and tutor the postgraduate students in various things around entertainment and the use of technology in entertainment. And I find that so enlivening, because they're all, 20-something-year-olds, very, very clever with computers. Also, because of my various work around academia and so on, working with particularly the Boston Science Museum on an exhibition called Star Wars, where science meets imagination. I've been lucky enough to work with real roboticists, real scientists who know the real side of this. And I really floored them one day because there was this big conference and I gave a speech, and I said, do you realize, for all the clever stuff you do with computers and robots, I'm the only person in this hall who knows what it feels like to be a machine. And there was this tremendous silence whilst they all thought about it. Because it's certainly given me a new attitude to to things in my life that I rely on. Actually, here's another little step in life that I hadn't thought of. Because of my work, I met the dean of this part of the university, who eventually got in touch with, I want you to come and teach the students. And I said, no, what could I teach? He said, you can teach them. I know you can. And I'm going, no, I can't. Actually, you can. Well, the result is about 4 years ago, I started coming here. And they still ask me back. So it means that somebody again had to encourage me to believe in myself. I would have liked to have believed I could teach, but I didn't think so. Now I know to some extent I can. And that's a great feeling. So, again, listen to people who believe in you. It's very easy not to believe in yourself sometimes. And sometimes there are people around you that are helpful, can let you believe in yourself. And I've been very lucky to meet one or two in my life, There's not many around.
See, that's incredible, and this is again the brilliant stuff that I think we want to share with our audience, is the importance of finding those people that do believe in you and discovering really what you're capable of. And you've been around some amazing people. You are certainly an amazing person, even in your own right. You're a cultural icon. And my question is what attributes do you think that these successful people have in common?
I think probably determination, and you don't have to be rude and ugly and sort of forceful. You just got to carry on believing, in spite of all the things that get in your way, that you can do it. Not that you're right, but that you can do it. People who think they're right all the time are a bit of a pain, but we were talking about people who tell you can't do things. Well, try it at least. What's the worst that can happen? Because if you never try, you'll never know.
Well, that's just it, and you may be sitting on something that changes your life forever.
I couldn't help noticing the other day that, my parents would have maybe quite liked me to be a banker back in 1964. On the news this week, banking has ceased to be quite the career, the safe career that it once was. And these days, one of the group of students that I teach here are video game makers, computer game makers, gaming. Gaming now has an industry greater than the film industry, greater than television, and any other form of electronic entertainment. Gaming is a huge industry. Who would have thought back in '64 that somebody who made games for people would have a good career? The world is changing all the time. People make money doing all sorts of strange things now, and that's okay. So, think, as they say, outside the box. Also, I do get fed up of meeting young people who, when you say, and what do you want to do? And they say, I want to be rich and famous. And that is just, that's a silly thing to say. Think of something you want to do, and if you make money at it, you're very, very lucky. But if you want to do it, you'll be happy anyway.
True enough.
We don't need that much money. We don't need 2 or 3 cars. We don't need all the home stuff that advertising tells you need to lead a happy life. How many, I shouldn't say this, but how many iterations of the iPod do we need to achieve happiness? You don't need all this stuff. And if you don't need it, you don't need the money to buy it. You see? Be happy in your choice of life, and that'll go a long way. If you can afford other stuff as well, great.
Wow, well, that's fantastic. Thank you for your time today, Anthony. It's been really good chatting with you on the phone. I think you've shared some incredible wisdom and certainly, the principles that you've shared are very true, and I think will make a very significant difference to people if they're, really looking for their passion and believing in themselves and looking with caution and care to find, where they'll find their most happiness and the things that they want to pursue. So I really thank you for sharing that with us today.
Well, there's nothing magic in what we've said today. It's just my experience, my personal experience, and knowing George and all that kind of thing. And that's the way I see it. I don't really have wisdom. I have my own personal experience to share, and I've done that. And if it tweaks one listener into thinking, what the heck, I'm going to do that thing, providing it doesn't hurt anybody else, providing it's not going to hurt you, then risk it. But don't tell your parents I said that. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you for talking with me. And I guess you have to say, if you think with strength, then the Force will be with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Anthony.